to the IEF, you know, I'm trying to understand the questioning. We got an IEF that's been around for 60 years. When we came into government, we implemented a strategy called Jobs Here. This was a strategy that was an update strategy. It was an update strategy with not only it was a strategy complete. It was a strategy, Mr. Speaker, complete with a business plan. What we tried to do initially is try to use an outdated formula for an updated plan. We tried immediately, Mr. Speaker, we tried to address the deficiencies in the IEF, and we continue to do that today.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Auditor General's report was clear. The measures that have been brought in by this government were ineffective and did nothing to increase transparency or accountability with the IEF. This government, well in opposition, said that themselves. But despite that fact, Mr. Speaker, over the course of the last 2 years, they spend more money through this program than anybody else. So my question to the minister is, why did he wait until he was called out by the Auditor General before you even think of making any meaningful changes to the IEF?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, that's simply not accurate. Do you know what, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, successive governments, past governments, for 50 and 60 years put up with the deficiencies of the IEF. We came into government, Mr. Speaker, we recognized the deficiencies in the IEF, and immediately we started to put in place mechanisms to address those deficiencies, Mr. Speaker. So for the first time in 50 to 60 years, we had the courage, not only the
Order. The honourable member for Yarmouth on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this government can continue to blame past governments for their mistakes, but I'll tell them what courage is. Courage is having the guts to take responsibility right now for their actions, Mr. Speaker. That's what courage is, and that's what Nova Scotians demand. For 2 years, this government did nothing on the IEF, did nothing, and now finally they're doing something. Why did they wait so long?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
You know what, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the record will show that we had vision, we had courage, and we started to implement changes to the IEF right from the very beginning. For the first time in 60 years, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General's report on the Office of the Fire Marshal shows gross incompetence. 47% of required inspections were not completed. There is no evidence that fire safety deficiencies discovered during the few inspections that were done were ever followed up on. The Auditor General opens his report by saying, and I quote, "The Office of the Fire Marshal is not doing an adequate job of protecting the public from fire safety risks in buildings." My question to the Minister of Advanced Education and Labour: if the Fire Marshal's office wasn't inspecting schools, keeping records, following up with violations, what the heck was it doing?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure, like everyone in this chamber, we take the advice and the recommendations of the Auditor General regarding the Office of the Fire Marshal very, very seriously. Public safety is a priority for this government, and we will act very quickly. In fact, we started response to some of the concerns raised last year, and we are fully committed to implement most of them this coming year. We will have public reports to let everyone know exactly the extent of the progress we're making and the changes we're making. There'll be a public report this fall, one over the winter, and one next year. But we are committed to making those improvements and ensuring that public safety in this province is not compromised. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as the parent of a child currently in the public school system, I am shocked by the fact that the Fire Marshal has not been inspecting schools. And I suspect a lot of other Nova Scotian parents will be shocked today too. Mr. Speaker, from the shocked and appalled. From the Auditor General's report, it appears that regarding public schools, and I quote, municipalities have not been conducting inspections as they feel they are owned by the province and not within their mandate. End quote. Our children, therefore, may not be safe at school because of jurisdictional fighting between this government and municipalities. My question is for the minister. How many schools in this province have not been inspected in the last 2 years?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say that the Department of Labour and Advanced Education has been working very closely with the Department of Education in regards to adequate and full and regular school inspections regarding fire safety. I can say as the former Minister of Education that often schools would be complaining about the inspections and expectations of the fire marshal staff. And so I know that those inspections were happening. We are committed to agreeing that that the regular schedule would include a full inspection every 3 years as required under the legislation. Within HRM, that would happen with municipal fire inspectors. Outside HRM, that would happen with staff from the Office of the Fire Marshal. But certainly, I think we all understand it's a shared responsibility, and we'd like to get to the point where there are self-inspections done by the school boards, and that the Office of the Fire Marshal would actually oversee the inspection process itself. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Great, Mr. Speaker. So now, since the Fire Marshal's office isn't doing its job, we're going to actually ask schools to do yet another thing, and they can inspect themselves. Great. In the sample, the Auditor General imagined 15 of the 30 daycares weren't inspected. Half the nursing homes weren't inspected. No university buildings were inspected. This government owes an apology to Nova Scotians for their dereliction of duty. The Auditor General refused to release the names of the facilities that weren't inspected. Shouldn't the loved ones know if their children or parents are in a building that may not be safe? My question, will this minister table a list of the uninspected facilities before the end of business today?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to remind everyone in the House that the Auditor General's report is a snapshot in time, and that's not to say that some of those facilities were not inspected shortly after that. But I do want to reassure the parents in this province who have children in daycare centres. Certainly those inspections are part of the reports that are posted on the Department of Community Services website, and if they want any reassurance as to what, the standards that are being maintained by their child's registered and licensed daycare center, they certainly can access that information on the website. We cannot go back and change what's happened in the past, but our government is making a commitment that every one of those 25 recommendations will be implemented, and that we will use this as an opportunity to improve public safety and inspection in this province. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the very beginning of the Auditor General's report today, he talks about the importance of following up on his recommendations. In every other walk of life, when one has an auditor's report, they are judged on their ability to follow up on the Auditor General's recommendations. In fact, I will quote from the report itself, where the Auditor General says, "Failure to address these weaknesses in a timely manner increases the risk of financial loss or failure to effectively deliver services." So, Mr. Speaker, how is this government doing? Well, the Department of Health has only implemented 36% of the last report's recommendations. The Department of Education has only implemented 14% of the last Auditor General's recommendations since 2008. And I quote, he says that the department is essentially ignoring his recommendations. Anywhere else, this would be unacceptable. And so my question to the Premier is this: will he show some leadership, some political leadership, and assure Nova Scotians that every single recommendation will be acted upon this time?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, every now and then one of those questions gets asked that you just can't believe. That chapter of the Auditor General's report is with respect to recommendations between 2005 and 2008, things that government did not do.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your
Mr.
first
Speaker,
supplementary.
You know what? I kind of expected the Premier to say that, because it's his stock answer. But the fact of the matter is, the Auditor General is talking about the record of this government to act on past recommendations which it is in their power to do. And in fact, he has a table in his report, which I will provide to this House, which shows that the worst record on implementation is from the current government. It is Table 3 from the slides that he released today, which shows that this government has acted on none of the prior report results, and on 45% only, less than half of the most immediate past Auditor General results, and I will table that for the House. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I see the Minister of Finance looking incredulous, but I will quote him. I will quote him, because in 2007, he said, and I quote, the provincial government needs to buck up and take more seriously these recommendations. So my question to the Premier is this: will he buck up, take his Minister of Finance's recommendation, and assure us that every single one will be followed up this time?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the Leader of the Conservative Party is this. What we're going to do is ensure that we track those recommendations appropriately and institute them in a timely manner. Of course, we are going to do the things they did not do.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if that includes running massive deficits and losing 14,700 jobs in 2 years, I agree he's doing something that previous governments have not done. Mr. Speaker, while we're talking about the member for Halifax Fairview, the current finance minister, I should say that he said in a Canadian Press article in February of 2008, that is before he was on the government side, the responsibility goes to the top of government. If the Premier said he wanted quick implementation of the Auditor General's recommendations, it would be done. Well, now he's over there with that Premier, Mr. Speaker, and so my question is to the Premier: was his finance minister wrong when he said that in opposition, or will the Premier show it is his responsibility to make sure these recommendations get followed and order that it be so?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, the recommendations that come down from the Auditor General, if they are accepted by government, of course, they should be implemented. Mr. Speaker, you know, the reality is that you can go almost through every department of government, and the reality is that over the last 10 years, there was such a mess created in so many of those departments that we are plowing through it, fixing them, Mr. Speaker, but it will take time.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear that this government has no interest in listening to expert and independent opinion. We have asked the government to let the Chief Electoral Officer speak at Law Amendments Committee, but they refused to accept our requests. Today, we discovered that the NDP government failed to consult with the Protection of Privacy Officer on very important matters. Mr. Speaker, both the Chief Electoral Officer and the Protection of Privacy Officer are independent authorities that disagree with this government's position. My question to the Minister of Justice is, why did the NDP government refuse to ask for and listen to the opinions of these independent authorities?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I'd really like to pose a question back. What documentation does he actually have that says we haven't? I've said from the start, I've said from the start, you might not like my answer, but I'm going to give you one. How I frame it is my choice. It's ironic that they frame it that way, because when you talk about the Elections Act, we had deep consultation, and I personally met with the CEO there. When you look at the other people that he mentions, I've listened, and anything that's put in writing to me, we respond to. So I would like to see from that side of the House produce something that says I didn't listen or that we didn't act.
Order, please. Order, please. The member is using the word "you." Now, I'd ask all honourable members in the legislature that I recognize and remind all honourable members, if you are recognized by the chair, that you must direct all comments and questions through the chair. The honourable member for Richmond, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that this government is more interested in ramming through laws and regulations than getting it right. This government has tried to make changes to laws that affects individuals' privacy and did not consult with the privacy officer. Instead, the privacy officer appears to have taken the initiative to express concerns directly to the Minister of Justice, which my understanding is his office has confirmed receipt of that correspondence. So my question to the Minister is, will the Minister indicate whether he has responded to the concerns raised by the Protection of Privacy Officer regarding impending government legislation?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank that member. And if I did use that three-letter word, you did. I apologize. But I will say that each and every letter from each and every person that comes into my office gets a response. And so if it's in my office, it's being developed with a response that clearly addresses the issue at hand and doesn't skirt around it.
The honourable member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we have a situation now where initially the government said it was simply the Liberal caucus raising concerns which are unfounded. Now we have Nova Scotia's Freedom of Information, Protection of Privacy Officer who has taken the initiative to write to the Minister of Justice expressing concerns over the protection of privacy of Nova Scotians' information. This is an independent individual, very qualified, very capable, very respected, whose concerns should be taken seriously. So I ask again, will the Minister of Justice confirm why he is not taking the concerns of the Protection of Privacy Officer serious when she says that Nova Scotians' personal information may be at risk?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to be very clear that I take each and every request from any of the departments and their concerns seriously. I'm unequivocally 100% committed to addressing any outstanding issues. On the issue of security and privacy, if you're referring to a particular piece of legislation, I'm very confident that the approach that we're taking in regards to that as a government is very sound. I think the interest of Nova Scotians as a whole is being taken into consideration, and I am always cognizant of both the taxpayer and the voter in this province.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General's report today made 28 recommendations concerning the Office of the Fire Marshal. Public safety, Mr. Speaker, is critical to all Nova Scotians, and people need to know that their children, their family and their loved ones are safe. The Minister in her statement today spoke of schools being inspected, but no mention was made in respect to daycares, nursing homes, hospitals or other public buildings. Will the Minister guarantee today that these public buildings will be inspected in addition to the public schools in our province?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In an earlier answer, I already committed to timely, regular inspections, fulfilling our regulatory role under legislation in this province. Those inspections have been ongoing. Part of the concern is that the documentation of those inspections has not been of the quality that it should be, so that when the Auditor General's staff investigated, they weren't always able to find up-to-date information on the last inspection. We have a plan, implementation plan already in place. We are working very diligently to make sure that we meet our internally imposed deadlines, and we will notify the public on a regular basis as to the improvements and changes that we are making. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, leadership is essential in building any team. The Minister was specific about the appointment of a project director, and that project director has begun developing a working plan. My question through you to the Minister is, how will this project director work with the current interim fire marshal?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In response to the honourable member's question, the project director has been working with the staff from the Office of the Fire Marshal since the end of March. They have made considerable progress. I had a meeting with the project director and the acting fire marshal just last week, and I'm very pleased with the speed with which they're responding to the recommendations, and they have already come up with a plan. And I am fully confident that the leadership of the Department of Labour and Advanced Education and the leadership within the Office of the Fire Marshal will guarantee that we will meet our necessary requirements under the legislation and the recommendations of the Auditor General. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria Lakes on his final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister spoke that it would be under the leadership of the Fire Marshal. In her statement today, there's no mention made about the appointment of a permanent Fire Marshal to serve this province. Again, leadership has to be shown. It has to start at the top. And will the Minister indicate to the House today if a search has been launched for a permanent Fire Marshal for this province?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Labour and Advanced Education is using the opportunity of the expanded role of the department, which took place in January, to review the responsibilities and roles of senior staff within the department, including the safety branch under which the Office of the Fire Marshal falls. And we are in the midst of that review of roles and responsibilities. And once it's completed, we will be, we anticipate that the position will be filled within the next 12 months. Thank you.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, figures released yesterday by the Halifax Regional Police and the RCMP show that violent crime is up in the Halifax region by 7%. Speaker, we've been telling the Minister of Justice for weeks that he needs to address this problem, and yet we have seen no action to date. Speaker, Nova Scotians have endured a wave of homicides, stabbings and shootings in the past few months, and we've yet to see a crime prevention strategy to address this issue from the NDP government. My question to the Minister is, with the Halifax Regional Police and the RCMP clearly showing that violent crime has risen 7%, will the Minister finally take this issue seriously and produce a strategy to prevent these violent crimes from happening?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I take violent crime seriously without question. And to allude that we don't is a misrepresentation of the facts. The facts are that I had the pleasure of meeting with the Mayor, the Chief of Police, the Commander of the RCMP, and other stakeholders recently, and we were to meet within a month of that meeting. That's a couple of weeks away. The issue of crime is not something that's solved in a flick of a switch. It takes time to study the root causes and the underlying problems. That's why we put such profound programs in as the Lighthouse programs, and many on the opposition side have them in the program and know the value and the richness that adds to the root causes. But they are also cognizant of the fact that change doesn't happen because we said it's going to happen. We're taking sound steps and we're talking to stakeholders. Violence has increased. We don't take that lightly. We take it seriously and we're committed. And I want to reassure all Nova Scotians that this minister not only spent a lifetime on the front lines of policing, but is still committed to this line of dealing with those issues.
The honourable member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, actions speak louder than words. This minister has had repeated opportunities to tell Nova Scotians exactly what this government's plan is, what its strategy is for dealing with the issue of violent crime. Instead, the facts that we know is that the minister allowed a $5.3 million cut to his budget, with $475,000 cut from anti-crime prevention measures. Yes, the Lighthouse program is a good program, but we need more, and we need a strategy that Nova Scotians can see that we are working together, all agencies necessary to address the problems of violent crime. So I ask the minister again, why is the minister delaying putting together a strategy to give Nova Scotians confidence that something is being done to address the issue of violent crime in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I really appreciate this question from my colleague across the line there. First off, let's set the record straight. The violence in the overall province of Nova Scotia is not going up. There is an increase of violence that is segregated to the HRM inner city region. For that, we are committed and we are liaising with those people and individuals that have the responsibility to deliver those services. The Department of Justice is a stakeholder. We value the partnership and we're working with those that have the primary responsibility in providing assistance and guidance we're asked for. And we are committed to furthering crime prevention programs in the community, but it's inappropriate for me to tell the Mayor of Halifax or the Chief of Police how they should run their business. We work in partnerships, we have a good relationship, and we will expand on that. But just the record straight, to create fear that is rampant across the province is creating an illusion that's not true and not factual.
The honourable member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the minister was listening, I quoted that the increase of 7% was in the Halifax regional municipality. So let's talk about facts here. Instead, the minister would throw out at us that we're creating fear. There is a fear that exists. Nova Scotians are not accustomed to seeing shootings, stabbings, and violence such as this in our society, and they're looking for government to take action and give them a sense of confidence that something is being done. The minister having meetings that no one knows about is not giving confidence to Nova Scotians. We have asked for a strategy
We're prepared to work with the government and with every other agency to see how we can address the problems of violent crime and try to put an end to it here in our province. So my final supplementary again is, why is the Minister of Justice refusing to put together an anti-crime strategy for the province of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the member. But just to set the record straight, when he talks about listening, on both questions that he's just posed to me, Mr. Speaker, he's ended it with saying, reference to the fullness of the province of Nova Scotia. But he got up and spoke about the 7% that I wasn't listening about in the HRM. And yet in both questions that he put, he made that reference and made that distinction. So let's get that part of the record straight. The second thing is anti-crime strategy. That this government has made the commitment, and as I stated, it is the Mayor of Halifax and their representatives and the Chief of Police to set forward. We are a welcoming partner, we have good dialogue, and we are committed to deal with that. And this government has shown leadership with a number of initiatives that we have put forward. When you look at our restorative justice, and I will quote the member from Yarmouth from the Liberal Party yesterday. He came to me and said, "What a great job!" Yesterday, he came and spoke to me about what a great job this government has done on the restorative justice, and would I please support that area in looking at restoring monies to the restorative justice program there. So I'm getting confused messages from the opposition. Which is it? Is it working down there? You can't have it both ways. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General in his report that was released today made 21 recommendations to improve the operating procedures at the Registry of Motor Vehicles and made a further 13 recommendations to improve the Registry's information technology. My question to the Minister, will the Minister commit to ensuring that all 34 of the AG's recommendations are implemented?
Who's that to? The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. We certainly take the Auditor General's recommendations seriously, and I do make a commitment to implement the recommendations that the Auditor General has suggested.
The Honourable Member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Auditor General also highlighted the need for a more effective approach to identifying at-risk drivers' records that might need further review. The audit identified a 10-month backlog in collision reports and a 3-month backlog of medical reports. Two key reports used to identify and assess drivers who pose a safety risk to the public. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, what plan is there to remediate the considerable backlog of reports?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we have thought about this actually for some time. The thought is that you can try to increase resources, more people on the job, but it's thought that may not eliminate that backlog as quickly as we want. We actually have moved the backlog from 10 months down to 8 months by hiring temporary staff. But I think we really are going to have to look at the possibility of electronic collision data entry, Mr. Speaker, and we think that this may help reduce the backlog even further.
The Honourable Member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Auditor General expressed concerns about the inadequate controls over the accuracy of security of Registry of Motor Vehicles data. He expressed the real fear about the possibility of fraudulent licenses or IDs being issued. My final question for the Minister, how long will we wait for the information issues at the Registry of Motor Vehicles to be addressed?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to make it clear that the Auditor General didn't identify any breaches in that regard, but we do take his concerns seriously. I'm going to say 18 months, but if we can shorten that up, but certainly as soon as possible is what our commitment is.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. On November 5th, 2010, the Minister of Education introduced a set of guidelines for students with type 1 diabetes in schools. Mr. Speaker, members of this side of the House agree that consistent guidelines are the right way to go, and in fact, we introduced a private member's bill a couple of years ago that called for safety for diabetic students. However, as with everything else with this government, the challenge is not in the intent, but in the implementation. My question to the Minister of Health and Wellness is, what role did the Minister play in developing and advising DHAs on their new responsibilities as outlined in the Department of Education's document entitled The Guidelines for Supporting Students with Type 1 Diabetes?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member will know, the Department of Health and Wellness provides financial support into district health authorities, and they provide a variety of services, hospital services, but they also do a lot of work around health promotion and protection, and we have diabetes programs, and particularly here in the Capital District Health Authority, we have quite strong and quite good diabetes programs. And so people who are on the front lines of health care are working on a regular basis in a variety of settings, including in our school system, and they would work with officials from school boards as well as the department when guidelines are being developed.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, parents in Cape Breton are particularly concerned, and in fact, they are frightened. And I'd like to table a letter from Cape Breton, a letter to the editor that expresses their views. The Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board is eliminating LPNs in the classroom for very young students that require assistance with managing their type 1 diabetes. And that's the content of the letter that the minister will be seeing. The EPAs are also being cut at the school board level, so even if EPAs provide the proper training or get the proper training, the question remains, will they have the time to assist students that have type 1 diabetes? Mr. Speaker, this definitely leaves a gap, and it is this gap that is providing a great deal of anxiety and concern right now for parents in Cape Breton. My question for the minister is, given that school boards are cutting health support staff and EPAs from their budgets, and the DHA budgets have been frozen and effectively cut, is the minister confident that DHAs will be able to provide the necessary health-related supports that are needed by type 1 diabetics in the classroom?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to the honourable member, as Minister of Health and Wellness, I have no responsibility for dealing with school boards and school board services. Those are services that are provided by the Department of Education or by the school board with funds through the Department of Education. LPNs in the classroom would not be something that the Department of Health and Wellness are involved in. This is a school board decision, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly would be interested in looking at any correspondence, and you know, the Minister of Education and I could discuss it, but beyond that, Mr. Speaker, this is not an area that I have direct responsibility for.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I think it goes without saying that the Minister of Health is responsible for the well-being of students in our schools, just as she's responsible for health care delivery across the province. Mr. Speaker, for some of these students, an insulin pump might be the right answer, a cost-effective way to ensure their health, but the government is refusing stubbornly to look at the evidence. The guidelines that I'm speaking about today in the schools call for an interagency agreement between school boards and DHAs. As part of the agreement, DHAs would be responsible for training school support staff and providing individualized health support if required. So, Mr. Speaker, to return to this issue at hand, my question to the minister is, in response to the very real concerns and fears of parents in Cape Breton today, and soon in other areas, no doubt, can the minister tell us whether at this time any interagency agreements between DHAs and school boards have been put in place?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I will do is I'll undertake to get some information on this matter for the honourable member.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Advanced Education and Labour. Earlier this year, the minister indicated her department would begin meetings with individual universities in preparation for MOU negotiations in May. It is now more than halfway through May. My question, has the department begun its individual MOU meetings with universities?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to graduations and unavailability of some of the presidents, some of the schedule has been delayed, but I understand that it's going to be fast-tracked as much during the month of June as possible, because everyone's interested in getting their particular situation at their institution in front of the Deputy Minister and her staff before the official and formal MOU discussions and negotiations start. So things are progressing. A meeting has been held with the university presidents. Also, I understand with the representatives from the student organizations, and things are progressing in a timely way. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Much of the O'Neill report is predicated on the assumption that enrollment at our universities is declining. These words are taken as gospel, but our universities are coming up with solutions to address Nova Scotia's population decline. Universities are attracting and retaining young people from other provinces and around the world. We have world-class universities, Mr. Speaker, and of course they should be reaching outside our provincial borders. Attracting students from other provinces and countries will help our demographic challenges, provided this government doesn't stand in the way by increasing tuition and preventing students from coming to our province. My question, will the minister acknowledge that attracting foreign students to Nova Scotia is a positive step toward addressing our demographic challenges?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And certainly we value the contribution that international students make currently to broadening the cultural experience of students here in Nova Scotia, but also because of the economic impact that they have in their institutions and the surrounding areas. We've done a number of things through various strategies, including the immigration strategy and others, to try to encourage them to stay here in Nova Scotia. They only help our demographic challenge if they decide to make Nova Scotia their permanent home, to raise families, to take positions or to start businesses within this province. So we have a multi-strand strategy to encourage them, to make sure that they know that they're welcome, and we certainly would be very pleased with an increase in the numbers of international students. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia will need more workers to address our labour market demands. In order for Nova Scotia to prosper, we need all of our young people to pursue higher education and meet their full potential. Now, the ministry could have started their negotiations, their individual meetings on the MOU earlier than May if they were concerned about problems. Mr. Speaker, students and our universities could in fact take this delay in negotiating the MOU as yet another sign the minister is still planning to hack 10% from university budgets in the next few years. My question to the minister, is the minister stalling negotiations so universities are forced to accept less funding and higher tuition fees at the last minute?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Contrary to the information used in the question, this government is actually protecting access to post-secondary education in this province by putting a cap on tuition fees, by increasing the tuition support package. And we will continue to listen to students and their families. We understand that having a post-secondary education in this province is going to be a necessity for about 75% of new job openings that occur in Nova Scotia, and we want to encourage as many Nova Scotians and others to take advantage of higher education. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, poverty is a reality for many Nova Scotians, and its presence was exemplified by the recent release of the Nova Scotia food costing data, showing that many individuals and families are unable to afford a healthy diet. Research shows, Mr. Speaker, that this puts individuals at risk of developing a variety of chronic disease or worsening existing ones. Can the Minister tell the House what role her department has played in the development of the childhood obesity strategy that is due out this coming fall?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for the question. We do, in fact, understand that food prices have risen. It's a worldwide trend that every country in this world has been facing, and we also understand that the obesity factor is critical to our healthcare system. And so, as a government that works interdepartmentally, our department has conversations with the Department of Health or whatever department necessary in order to go forward with any type of strategy to look at the solution to those type of situations such as obesity. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, many low-income Nova Scotians who rely on the Minister's Department for assistance will benefit this coming July from the $15 a month increase in personal allowance. And this is a welcomed announcement. But, Mr. Speaker, this will not go far when there's an increase in food costs, rents, and power rate hikes that we'll once again see in the coming year. Mr. Speaker, quite simply put, there are families in Nova Scotia that will have to choose between purchasing food or paying their power bills. So I'm wondering if the Minister can tell the House how much of her department's budget goes towards paying outstanding power bills for clients who are at risk of being disconnected.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to note that one of the things that we have done as a government since over the last 2 years, we've taken a multiple type strategy in terms of helping Nova Scotians. So we have offered many different new programs, such as the affordable tax credit, the poverty reduction tax credit. We just recently, and the affordable tax credit was a $75 million investment. We just recently also announced many other programs of another $22 million that's going to be rolled out over the next several years. So, and I've mentioned before, now a single mom with 2 children is presently receiving up to over $3,400 more than they did before this government came into place, or it's $2,900, Mr. Speaker. I want to be correct on my figures. So that shows the increase. And when there's issues with regards to power, we work on an individual basis, and we work with the Nova Scotia Power. It's been very, very good to work with our department to help people out that have those that type of crisis on their hands. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, poverty tax credits, affordable tax credits, just aren't enough in the with ever-increasing power rate hikes. And quite simply put, so individuals understand, when the Department of Community Services assists an individual with an outstanding power bill, that is like a small one-time loan that is later on taken off their checks. So in light of this, and the department loaning out extensive amounts of money to bail out individuals on power bills, I'm wondering if the minister is prepared to commit today to writing the Utility Review Board and citing that in light of another Nova Scotia Power increase, it will further inhibit and greatly affect her department from living within its means.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I said, our government will be watching, and we will be there when the Utility Board is reviewing any increase in power, and therefore they'll know what our position is in terms of. They know that we are working very hard in order to make a difference, and I have to say Nova Scotia Power has been very good to our department in terms of working out what they can in payment plans, pay them back, and we work very close with our clients, and I think that's what's very important to know. And the fact is that we have increased the investment in low-income individuals in this province much more than any other government ever has, and I'm very proud of that, and I know that our colleagues here are very proud of that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Yesterday during question period, the Minister indicated there are wait time standards associated with treatment to addiction services in the Valley and presumably around the province. However, Mr. Speaker, when you visit the department's website on wait times and you scroll through the alphabetical list of procedures posted, addiction treatment services are not among them. Given the minister stated yesterday during question period that the Annapolis Valley DHA is meeting the standards established, standards which are not available to the general public, will the minister table the wait times for access to addiction services, treatment services in the Valley before the end of the spring session, likely tomorrow?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And yes, Mr. Speaker, I will provide the member with information on wait times for addiction treatment, both in the Annapolis Valley and elsewhere, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to thank the Minister for willing to provide that information. Mr. Speaker, yesterday when I asked the Minister a question about residents of the Valley, they could expect timely access to long-term treatment services, the Minister replied, the residents of the Valley are meeting wait time standards established. Here is what I know, Mr. Speaker. Residents in the Valley have been in and out of detox over and over again, in some cases 7 or 8 times, costing our healthcare system money, only to find themselves back in detox due to lack of treatment. If the Valley is meeting wait time standards, and we have rotating visits to detox, well, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't bode well for the standards. My question to the Minister, will the Minister table the wait time data for addiction treatment services for all district health authorities again before the end of session, possibly tomorrow?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I made a commitment to table the wait time information for addiction treatment, and I will fulfill that commitment. Mr. Speaker, there are many services that we offer in terms of addiction treatment, and detox is one of those services, but it's not the only service. And it's true that there are people who go into detox repeatedly sometimes, and sometimes that's what has to happen in terms of breaking the cycle of addictions. Some people will not be successful with only one admission to a detox program for whatever reason. And these addictions is a very serious situation for people who find themselves in, and being able to overcome addiction can, for many people, be a lifelong struggle, Mr. Speaker, that requires multiple points of entry into our healthcare system.
The honourable member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in the Valley have attempted to access treatment services. They haven't been able to do so. Despite what the minister says about meeting standards, access has been challenging. My question to the minister, given the minister claims the Annapolis Valley is meeting standards, people are still waiting, will the minister commit to revisit the standards established to determine whether they are appropriate?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are constantly reviewing the services and the programs that we provide, particularly as new research, new evidence indicates that there are better practices available. And it is on the basis of best practices that we develop our services. And they should not and they do not stay fixed as services, but they, based on our evaluation, change over time, Mr. Speaker. But I also want to inform members, Mr. Speaker, that when there is a need for someone to go into a program and there is capacity in another district and no capacity in the local district where the person resides, we have policy, and we're very open to assisting people into getting access to programs in a different district health authority. So the system is certainly not a perfect system, but it is one that we constantly evaluate, and we will continue to do so in the hopes that we can offer the best services that people need in this province who suffer from addictions, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is again for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Last week during question period, I asked the Minister a very simple question about the Emergency Room Protection Fund. She has now had a few days to reflect on the answer and gather the information that we need for the record. So I'd like to ask that question again, and that is to the Minister, how much of the $3 million Emergency Room Protection Fund did the Minister spend for that purpose in the 2010-11 fiscal year?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I actually our department spent $3 million and more on improving emergency room services around the province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, in 2009, on May 14th, the Leader and now Premier held a press conference and announced that if elected, they would establish the $3 million Emergency Department Protection Fund to keep emergency rooms open. In fact, the information I have here, which I'd like to table, went on to say that the $3 million fund would be used to hire doctors for hard-to-fill shifts so that emergency rooms would stay open. My question to the Minister of Health and Wellness is, how many doctors were hired for hard-to-fill shifts with this $3 million Emergency Department Protection Fund so that ERs could remain open as promised?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my previous question, we, in fact, spent the $3 million, and we spent more than $3 million in improving emergency room services around the province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the point that may be missed here is that the government had planned and promised to spend the money on more doctors to keep the shifts open all the time in the ERs around the province. And there was a subtle, or perhaps not so subtle, shift in the spending for emergency rooms. And if you look at the budget highlights for last year, or for 10-11, in last year's budget, they actually changed their purpose to say that the $3 million ER Protection Fund will improve service and access by implementing initiatives identified by the province's emergency care advisor, and that would be Dr. John Ross. So my question to the minister, which I would like to have an answer to, is what did the minister do with the Emergency Room Protection Fund? Did she hire doctors as planned, or fund initiatives recommended by Dr. John Ross, or did she give money back to the Minister of Finance?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once again, we spent all of the $3 million earmarked for the Emergency Room Fund and more, Mr. Speaker. That did, in fact, get us ER doctors, but it also got us ER other personnel in the ER. It helped us open the Rapid Assessment Unit over at the Queen Elizabeth, which has now diverted literally hundreds of patients from having to wait and go through the ER, Mr. Speaker. And it has also allowed us to develop and put in place more services that are performed by paramedics, Mr. Speaker, and other personnel. So the fund is a very useful fund, and we have not returned one penny of that to the Minister of Finance.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, way back on May 3rd, by way of a question, I informed the Minister of Education that 5 community liaison officers serving in the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board would be cut. And at that time, the Minister was unfamiliar with the issue, but promised to investigate the situation and to work with the board to deal with that issue. Recently, in the Cape Breton Post, the Minister said, and I quote, "We need to have a good service. We need to have the good service that community liaison officers provide, and Cape Breton will be no different than the rest of the province," end quote. My question through you to the Minister of Education. On May the 3rd, the Minister said the funding for the community liaison officers at the Cape Breton Victoria School Board was an anomaly. Does the Minister's statement in the Cape Breton Post mean that she is changing the way these important officers will be funded at that school board?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much for bringing this issue up again. The liaison officers that we have in the province are very important. People want to have our schools to be safe, but liaison officers provide a very valuable service for other areas too, because children can speak with the liaison officer. As you know from the news in the last day, our liaison officers have been very busy in the province with our students in our schools. What I would like to say, and the honourable member opposite knows, that I'm taking this issue extremely seriously, and that Cape Breton schools will be making sure that we have the appropriate liaison officers. The honourable member opposite, I've had a conversation. I'm working on this. It's not how I answer my question in the House. What it is that I am committed to is the action, and I am committed to making sure that the Cape Breton Regional School Board and the police department, that we work together so that we can maintain service in Cape Breton. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure that the Minister is sincere, and I would never question that. However, there are a number of parents that need some reassurance now and not later, Mr. Speaker, and I understand that the number of community liaison officers varies dramatically from board to board in this province. Currently, there are 5 community liaison officers serving the students in Cape Breton Victoria School Board. My question to the Minister is, will the Minister confirm today that the number of community liaison officers will not decrease in Cape Breton?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I'm committed to is to making sure that we are going to be having service in Cape Breton, and I'm not going to guarantee any number because I only know about the services that the honourable member has brought up, and also my members from Cape Breton South and Cape Breton Centre. I'm looking at the whole school board because I'm not absolutely sure that those are the only liaison officers that we have in Cape Breton. So I have an investigation underway at this time. We're not absolutely sure if we only have 5. We might have more liaison officers in other schools. I'm getting all of that information at this time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to inform the minister and all members of this House that these 5 members that we have now are very valuable. And the member from Glace Bay and I have been talking about this, and there's other members from Cape Breton have the same concerns. This issue is more than just about, this issue is not about politics. This issue is about the safety and the concerns we have for our children. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we took the time to go and check with all the other boards to see the numbers of liaison officers they had, and we've checked it around the province, and they vary greatly. As a matter of fact, if anything, we need more in Cape Breton because Riverview, because of the closure of Holy Angel School, will now have close to 1,100 students and no liaison officer. Mr. Speaker, the minister herself has said publicly that CLAOs are invaluable resources in our schools, and as she said in her reply earlier, they've shown that this week. They are frontline workers who act as mentors, role models, and advisors to students who face bullying, mental health concerns, substance abuse, and family instability. When will the minister tell parents, teachers, and students how many community liaison officers will serve the Cape Breton Victoria School Board in September?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to stand here today and to repeat what I've said, that I am committed to working with the school board and with the Cape Breton Regional Police to maintain liaison services in our Cape Breton schools. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. What a reaction. While in opposition, the Premier launched a province-wide petition which called for no power rate increases until Nova Scotia Power and the province were required to help people save at least 15% on their power bills. Mr. Speaker, now the now Deputy Premier tabled a petition on the floor of the House on November 3rd, 2005 with almost 32,000 signatures. Now the NDP will say they've taken steps towards this with their gesture of removing the provincial portion of the HST. However, the reality is the total cost of electricity that people pay on their bills has increased since this government took power. And in fact, the province added charges to the bill through Efficiency Nova Scotia tax did oppose during the election. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier deliver on his demand that power bills go down by at least 15% before allowing power rate increases?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, he's right, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad that I was able to be instructive as to what an activist MLA actually looks like. I know he has difficulty understanding what that looks like. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that after 2005, we also conducted, of course, a successful campaign, both electorally and otherwise, to have the HST, the province's portion of the HST removed from power bills in this province, Mr. Speaker. We're very pleased and proud that is the case. In addition, Mr. Speaker, part of saving the money, of course, is having an appropriate Efficiency Nova Scotia program that can help consumers do what is the very best in the way of reducing power bills, which is simply not using the electricity in the first place.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, all of what the Premier just said is irrelevant. He committed that an NDP government would help Nova Scotians reduce their power bills by 15%, and they've gone up since he took office, including the HST cut. So that doesn't answer the question, Mr. Speaker. The Premier also said at the time, quote, "With power bills going up, people are rightfully worried about freezing in the dark next winter," unquote. Mr. Speaker, people are even more worried now since over the next 3 years, power bills will go up by 20%. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier live up to the commitment that they made in 2005 that before they allow any power rate increases, they will ensure that residents of Nova Scotia see their bills and their power usage drop by 15%, at least?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's just ridiculous. We never made any such commitment, and the reality is, Mr. Speaker, we have implemented the only real measures that have been aimed at reducing the cost of electricity for consumers, including taking the provincial portion of the HST off of those, not just off of electricity, but off of power costs or energy costs, Mr. Speaker, which for many people means considerable rebates on things like home heating oil, which of course we have some of the highest usage in the country. But in addition, Mr. Speaker, we have also launched the most aggressive renewable electricity plan, in fact the only renewable electricity plan in this province's history that is aimed at stabilizing rates and ensuring that consumers over the years to come will be able to take advantage of stable rates. This is something, by the way, Mr. Speaker, that is opposed by that member.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm shocked by the Premier's comments. First of all, Mr. Speaker, first I will table the commitment by the Premier from the Herald, November 5th, 2005, where he made the commitment that 2005. Second of all, the Premier is absolutely incorrect when he said that we opposed the renewable electricity plan. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we stood in this House, supported it. The only concern we had was the inclusion of biomass and the fact they spent $10,000 for a photo op on a mountain instead of protecting taxpayers' dollars. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a real issue. Power rates are rising under this government. This government added the Efficiency Nova Scotia tax to power bills that they opposed in the election. This government put the health of Nova Scotians at risk and guaranteed significantly higher bills in the future by relaxing mercury emission rates. And now it's this government that will not live up to its demand that power rate bills come down 15% before increases are contemplated. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier tell Nova Scotians why he cared so much about power rate increases in opposition and demanded government, not the Utility and Review Board, do something, but now is content with his minister saying, quote, ultimately it is the URB that's going to make the final decision, unquote.
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, let me just set the record straight. What the member has just tabled does not say what he led the House to believe it says. That's the first thing, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the function of the Utility and Review Board is to impartially assess the rate cases so that consumers can be assured that what they are being charged is fair. And, Mr. Speaker, I find it hard to believe that the honourable member would suggest that there should be political interference in that process.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness.
It was Graham's idea in opposition. Graham's demand.
It's our own member.
Shall we go? Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order. Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. My question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Last week, the Minister indicated it was her intention all along to pass the Fair Drug Prices Act at the same time that a tariff agreement and expanded scope of practice package were negotiated. Since then, we know that a negotiation date was cancelled last week, and this week, the first and only day scheduled for negotiations is tomorrow. As you may be aware, Mr. Speaker, the Pharmacy Association made an offer to the government to negotiate 24 hours a day until an agreement can be reached. My question to the Minister is, given the Minister's goal of having a settlement reached by July 1st and giving the willingness of PANS to negotiate 24 hours a day, why hasn't the Minister taken the pharmacists up on their offer?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I have indicated many times here on the floor of the House, as we debated the Fair Drug Prices Act, we are in the process of negotiating with the Pharmacy Association of Nova Scotia. Those negotiations will take place somewhere other than on the floor of this chamber, Mr. Speaker, and we will approach those negotiations with a view to putting in place a fair and balanced settlement that will serve both the taxpayers of the province and the pharmacists and pharmacies of this province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax-Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think that it's very important to remind the Minister we're not trying to have the negotiations on the floor of the House. We're asking why the government isn't at the table with the pharmacists today. If there's urgency. Earlier in the House, the Minister said this was a priority, that it is an urgent matter. So why aren't the government, my question to the Minister is, why isn't the government there now, sitting with the pharmacists, more than taking this casual approach of once a week?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I know it's quite late in question period, and that's why the questions tend to get a little thin in terms of the content, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, just to reiterate the point, the government is at the table in negotiations on the agreement with the pharmacist right now in terms of their dispensing fees and the markup that they put on prescription drugs.
The Honourable Member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that while the Minister talks about thin questions, it's more like thin-skinned ministers. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister another question to do with pharmacy as my final supplementary. Mr. Speaker, the Minister has estimated that there's a savings of $6 million coming from this Fair Drug Pricing Act in the first year, but that figure is a far cry from what the pharmacists are estimating, which is $15 million in the first year alone, and even more than that in the second year, going up to $26 million in savings. So it seems disingenuous at the moment that there's such a difference in those figures. I would like to ask the Minister, as my final supplementary, if she will table for the House today the actual calculations used to arrive at the $6 million figure for savings in this first year, because it seems completely absurd.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't understand why the honourable member persists in wanting to undermine the negotiations that are going on at the table, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government is at the table on behalf of the taxpayers, on behalf of the seniors. I direct the honourable member to today's Herald, where Mr. Van Goyer, the head of the seniors group of 9, as well as the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, wrote a letter endorsing Bill 17 and saying this is a great opportunity for seniors.
Order, please. Order. Oral questions put by ministers has ended. I will now recognize the House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In this abbreviated Opposition Day, I'd like you to call Resolution 1241.
Resolution number 1241. The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The resolution number 1241, the operative clause of which is therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly urge the NDP government to reconsider their deep cuts to public education in Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, here we are again talking about education cuts. The opposition has brought this up as opposition business week after week because we believe these cuts are wrong. But we're not the only people who believe these cuts are wrong. Richard Zellick of the World Bank said tough economic times are not the time to cut education spending. Instead, what we have is funding for literacy and math mentors cut by 50%, math mentors cut by $1.05 million, literacy mentors cut by $773,000. And Madam Speaker, I must say that I have heard from people all across the spectrum about these education cuts. A couple of weeks ago, I was at Bedford Place Mall selling carnations for MS, and almost every single person who stopped to talk with the woman I was selling the flowers with talked to us about education cuts, and they could not believe what was coming down the pike. Now, they may have talked to me because I'm the former education critic. They may have talked to my partner because she is a retired teacher. But the fact of the matter is, people are very concerned about these cuts. We've heard from teachers who are concerned about what is going to happen to their students in their classrooms if they are not getting appropriate instruction. We have heard from special education teachers who cannot imagine how they will be able to teach the students they have in their classes without the assistance of EPAs. And we've heard from parents of children either with learning disabilities or who have special needs who cannot imagine how their children are going to make it through the days without the assistance of EPAs. We've seen the specter of the reading recovery program being axed and the substitute program being put in place so they can save $2 million. And what concerns me about this is there's no evidence that this program that they have cobbled together in record time will actually do anything. It's not even a program yet. It's a framework. It's a framework, and if that, and if they wanted, as the minister claims, to reach more students, then why wouldn't we have put more money into reading recovery? Reading recovery is at least proven. We know it works. But instead, we're going with a program that has no evidence behind it at all. There's no evidence behind it at all. We're going to make this thing up and it's going to work. And we're going to do it because, well, we want it to work. And so it's magical thinking, Madam Speaker. There's no evidence behind it. And I've heard comments from across the way that teachers are saying that this isn't going to work because they're just worried about losing their jobs. Mr. Speaker, that's not why the teachers are concerned. The reading recovery teachers will just bump into the classroom. They're not going to lose their jobs. They're going to go into the classroom. The fact is, it's the young teachers who are not going to get jobs. It's the new teachers who are not going to get jobs. So if a reading recovery teacher is telling us they're concerned about the program that's coming in, it's not because they're worried about losing their jobs. They will still have a job. They've got seniority. The department has said that cuts will not impact students, but this simply isn't possible. You know, and we've heard an evolving, changing story along the way. Well, initially they were just going to cut money from the board level. Well, but then, you know, we pointed out, well, geez, that's a bit of a problem, since HRSB, for example, their board cost for running the board is 4%. So how are you gonna just, you know, what are you gonna do, shut the whole board office down? The South Shore Regional School Board took a 2.47 cut, according to government. In reality, this is a 4% cut when you add in all the cost pressures. And so, you know, they can say, oh, well, you know, we're not cutting money from per student funding, but the fact is they're getting rid of programs that have made a huge difference to students over the last number of years. Things like math mentors, things like literacy mentors. Even a status quo budget would have meant significant cost pressures, negotiated salary increases, upgrades to teacher licenses, and inflationary increases in operating costs. And as we continuously pointed out, you can say there are fewer students, but if you still have the school open and you still have the bus route, it's going to cost the same amount to pick up 20 students as it will be to pick up 30 students. You still have to have those aspects of education there. And there are things that make education work that are being cut. For example, the South Shore Regional School Board has been forced to cut library services, and this government really hasn't given them a choice. School library staff are going to be cut by half. School libraries will only be open half the week, or less in many cases. And for many of us, I know that the pleasure of going to the school library and having a librarian who had chosen a book for you, that will be gone. And I can tell you, there weren't a lot for a while there weren't a whole lot of librarians in the school system anyway. There were a lot of parents who came in and tried to fill in for the school librarian, and the job we were doing as parents was a noble one, but it was not the job that a school librarian would have done, a paid school librarian. South Shore Regional School Board has said that historically their literacy rates were low when compared to other areas of the province. And now their incredibly successful reading recovery program has been axed. 90% of students in that program met expectations under that program. Literacy mentors, cut. Library staff, cut. All of these things went to support student literacy. Now, South Shore, we were told by board members they would have liked to keep reading recovery, but they're not allowed. They were banned by this government from keeping reading recovery. Even if they had the money, they were not allowed to keep it. And maybe that would have been a bit of a problem, because if their literacy rates kept improving and the rest of the province wasn't, then in fact, they'd be showing up, the government, for the chimera that this program actually is, that they're planning to introduce. Boards are doing more than ever before. There's increased special education challenges, legislative requirements, a diverse student population, supports to allow for greater student achievement, and targeted government initiatives. But we are not giving them more money. And if you look at HRSB, there's unique challenges there. There's an increasingly higher number of students at risk, more per capita than other boards. And so whether it's, you know, children with learning disabilities, whether it is programs that divert children, they are not. HRSB is not getting the assistance that it needs. Programs like Youth Pathways have been axed. EPAs are being axed. Police officers in school are being axed. And then you have to ask yourself, what's it going to be like in a high school very soon? You know, this week we saw a drug bust at Millwood High. If I were a parent of a child who were going to Millwood High, I'd be concerned. You know, the minister really made a mistake too. I think we were in Truro at the time when it happened, when she targeted boards' accumulated surpluses, because in fact, that was not the board's money to even touch. That was money that children had raised for their school trips and various things. So, Madam Speaker, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak on this issue today, and I urge the government to rethink their cuts.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Well, I always welcome the opportunity to talk about public education in our province and the important decisions government is making on behalf of our students, their families, and all Nova Scotians. Nova Scotia is a place for our youth to get a high-quality education. The dedication, the expertise, and the passion of our teachers and school support staff are second to none. As Dr. Ben Levin recently stated in his report on public education, Nova Scotia has a very good public education system, which has served the province well. And he went on to add, any system, no matter how good, can get better. He also noted, getting better does not necessarily depend on more money. Madam Speaker, my goal as Minister is to make sure our children receive the best possible education and that many more students achieve higher levels of accomplishments. As Dr. Levin rightly pointed out, Madam Speaker, the challenge we face as a province is to continue to improve our very good school system at a time when we face significant declining enrollments and fiscal pressures. It is imperative that we use our limited resources as efficiently and as effectively as possible. That means doing a better job of matching our funding with the actual needs of our students. Just like Dr. Levin suggested in his report, good outcomes do not come from money alone, but from the thoughtful application of resources to proven methods of good education. We need to make wise choices so that we can continue to provide the best education to all students while living within our means. Every area of government, education included, must share in the responsibility of bringing Nova Scotia back to financial good health. Madam Speaker, I believe the government has been successfully meeting the challenge of preserving what we value most in education. A little over 3 weeks ago, this legislature passed a budget that puts children first and protects learning in the classroom, even as we and school boards deal with limited resources and enrollment decline. You have heard me say many times, Madam Speaker, but it does bear repeating, because it is the underlying reason for the need to right-size our public education system. We have almost 30,000 fewer students than we had a decade ago, but we have, over that same period, more teachers and support staff hired. The previous government allowed spending to rise by more than 40%, and administration grew by 20%, even as the numbers of students dropped by 18%. Even more to the point, we will continue to see fewer and fewer students coming to school every year for the next 10 years. By the year 2020, we anticipate as few as 112,000 students, and then it will probably finally level off. That will be the same number of students that were in the school system in 1910. Madam Speaker, we must position ourselves for the future so that we will have a strong and sustainable public school system for the students of today and tomorrow. Nova Scotians demand government live within its means. They also demand that we do more to provide our children with the best education. The past several months have been challenging, but I believe we and boards have made difficult decisions that will lead to a more effective and sustainable public education system. Madam Speaker, let's not forget that Nova Scotia taxpayers are investing over $1 billion for public education every year. And Madam Speaker, they want us to use their hard-earned money as effectively as we can for the benefit of our children. Even with the fiscal pressures that we face, we must remember that our funding has increased by more than 200 students this year. And the student ratio will remain among the lowest in a generation at 13.4 to 1. Madam Speaker, my government continues to put our children's education among its highest priorities. Like all other departments, we are doing our part to protect the taxpayers' investments in the education of our children. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to stand and speak for a few moments on this resolution. And I know the member that's going to be speaking after me is saying we got a little extra time here, and we do. And probably what I'll do is probably give some of her time, because ultimately, as a previous Minister of Education, I think she has a lot to bring to this discussion as well. So what I'm going to focus on quickly right now sits around the issue of cuts anyway. The issue of cuts is that it forces the hand of school boards to find efficiencies within their own budgets. Because what this government has done on many occasions already is really just blame the school boards for spending too much money and forcing them to try to find cuts to education. And what we're hearing back from many of the school boards is the impossibility to do it without impacting the classroom. And impacting the classroom means, maybe a larger number of students in classrooms. The student-to-teacher ratio ends up changing dramatically. And what that does is it impacts the student's ability to learn, because maybe the teacher doesn't have as much time to spend with particular students, depending on their learning requirements. You put 28 kids in a classroom versus 23 kids, for example. There's a huge difference in the learning ability of those students. So if you're getting rid of teachers, if you're bringing that number of teachers down, because that's the only real mechanism in which to save money within the school system, or even with any system that government has. Forget 80% or more is taken up by human resources, taken up by the people that are offering the services. In this particular case, of course, the teachers offering their knowledge and their teaching ability to these students so that they can move through the school system. We've heard from this government cutting literacy programs or making dramatic changes to it in the guise of cuts. And this has been a confusing one to many parents when it came to reading recovery. The issue of reading recovery is we had a very good program. We had a robust program, a program that was world-renowned, that was providing tremendous literacy capabilities or literacy help to the students that need it the most. I've stood in this House on many occasions already and talked about the benefit that reading recovery had for my child, who did have a reading difficulty. And, the minister, to her credit, stood here and said, here is the new program that we're going to be providing. Well, Madam Speaker, really what we got was sort of a bunch of bullets on a piece of paper, what the program might look like. Here's what it could do. And, really just a sketch of a program, a framework is what they called it. Well, Madam Speaker, quite honestly, we need to have a program that's going to be up with true deliverables and ways to evaluate the program ready for September. And I don't think this government can actually get that done in time. So I think that's a tremendous loss for students in Nova Scotia to not be able to access such an important program. Madam Speaker, this whole thing, as bad as it is for students when cuts are happening, this is devastating for new teachers. I know a lot of individuals who are just graduating from our teacher programs across Nova Scotia and are now facing the prospect of having to go somewhere else to find a job. They're very good individuals, people who have taken it seriously, gone to school for their 5-year programs, 6-year programs in some cases, and lo and behold, when they finally graduate off, there is no job here in Nova Scotia for them. That's what these cuts mean, because as you're moving teachers around because of the collective agreement, that the ones on the bottom of that totem pole are the ones that end up getting bumped off. And I can count a number of really good school teachers, really good individuals who we would love to have teaching our children are going to have to go somewhere else in order to find a job in the profession of their choice. I don't think that's fair. I really don't think that's fair when I think we had a program or a school system that was really starting to respond to the needs of students. You know, 10 years ago, we hear that number a lot. 10 years ago, we've paid 40% more for education. Well, Madam Speaker, if you brought an economist and looked at this one quite closely, what you would see is that in normal inflation, there has been a growth in the education system. This has been natural inflation along the way. There's been some extra investments put in our I keep saying health system, in our education system, but they've actually started to get real results. I mean, 10 years ago, the education system, was not giving us the results they required in literacy and math and sciences. When we were comparing the outcomes of our students compared to other jurisdictions in Canada and the US, we were at the bottom of that list, And through steady investment, smart investment, new programming, we were able to get our kids to a point where they were performing extremely well in comparison to other jurisdictions. Maybe not first, but they were probably getting second. In a lot of cases, they were getting first. Madam Speaker, we still haven't seen the full fallout of the Ben Levin report. There are a couple of really good things in there. I'm not going to throw it all out just yet, because it talks about success of our students, reducing failure in our education system. And I can agree with that. If things aren't failing, then we're not spending all our time trying to fix that failure. Whether it's how the student's learning, what the program's doing, the inability of finding a way to fix things. But Madam Speaker, there are some things that really started to irk us, really, especially when Dr. Levin talked about the issue of educational assistants, or TAs, in our classroom. It talked about not really, that there was competing bodies of evidence that would show that maybe teaching assistants, educational assistants, are actually detrimental to the learning of students. Well, I can tell you, I had never heard of that before. And I've talked to a lot of individuals in our education system since that time that are pulling their hair out. They've never heard of this before. If you talk to teaching assistants, if you talk to resource teachers, if you talk to students who have had the opportunity to have a TA, where they have progressed in their lives through the education system, it has been absolutely tremendous. So for us to say, maybe we should be reducing the number of it, I think is really throwing out an educational aspect that has proven over and over, time and time again, to work. But we haven't actually heard of how many TAs are being knocked off this year. But even if we look at next year taking more of a cut, the year after that taking more of a cut, eventually we'll get to where we were back in October and November, when school boards came to us and said, oh my God, they're asking for 23% cut over 3 years. That's not right. It is just not right. We need to find a balance between good outcomes. We need to find a way to be able to afford the programming that we have and expand on it, because we want our kids to be able to succeed, not just here in Nova Scotia, but right across the world. Don't forget, we live in a world market today. There are no borders as we once would have believed in them. So you're not graduating from school and working for Alliant or working for MT&T or becoming a school teacher or working for a local company. You're working for international companies. You're traveling around the world. You need to be competitive in that market. And I think that's where we were heading until, I guess until the black mark that we've got, or the red mark that we've got. We've got a big X on our education system right now, and it's a great big question mark. that I think this party, the Progressive Conservatives, and I think the Liberals are also concerned about, that this is a big black X, that we need to find a way to get beyond it. So I'm going to leave my the rest of the time of this debate to the member for Colchester North, because I believe she has a lot to offer to this issue as well. But I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this resolution.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I am pleased to stand today and speak to Resolution 2141, and in particular to some of the language in the resolution which I think clearly defines why we are where we are in this debate over public education. It talks about short-sighted and ill-advised decisions, and I had the opportunity in question period on more than one occasion to ask the minister who she may have consulted with, what experts she may have talked to in order to help her make some of the decisions that were being made. And for whatever reason, the minister chose not to share that with me or with the House. And again, that would suggest that either she didn't consult with anyone, or for whatever reason is not proud to share the fact as to who those people were. And we have, Madam Chair, a whole host of experts in the education field. And as someone who spent their career in a classroom, a grade 1 classroom or an elementary classroom, I believe, the minister would have known who those experts were. And nobody, Madam Speaker, works in isolation in the education profession or in others. They certainly do seek out opinions, advice, and consultation, because it's only when you do that thorough consultation and research that you can come up with a good decision. And we can all make decisions and people can all be critical of them, but if you have made the decisions with all of the information that you can have available, it does strengthen the outcome. And I would speak, if I could, about a couple of members in this House who helped me make some good decisions in education. The member from Timberley Prospect. I respected his opinion. He is an educator, and he was a person who would sit down with me and we would talk about issues that were important to kids. And so I valued that opportunity and I valued the opinion. I also had an opportunity to speak with the member from Kings West, and again, an educator, and whose perspective and opinions were different than mine and different from the member from Timberley Prospect. But together, instead of one person's mind and one person's experience, that was three. And so, you know, the minister has at her fingertips all of those experts and all of those people out there who can help her make decisions that won't be short-sighted or ill-advised. And as unfortunately, however, though, since that hasn't happened, we are dealing with some decisions that are devastating and will cripple the public education system that we currently have. The myth that has been shared across this province and not believed by anybody is that declining enrollment dictates a cut in funding. And I think that is another example of short-sighted and ill-advised decisions, because if the minister was aware of the programs that have been put in place to support students who have learning disabilities and who have challenges in the classroom and who are now able to better succeed in our public schools, that's where the money has been invested, and that's something that the minister should be proud of, and that's something that the minister should fight for to continue. So, you know, again, it's making decisions without either understanding or accepting or acknowledging that there are some good things that are in place, and the short-sighted and ill-advised decisions and that have been made are not in the best interest of kids. I have listened as the minister read a script today, and she talked about the Ben Levin report. We've heard from the member of the PC party about some of the information in that report. And I spoke about that earlier. That report has no relevance to what is happening in education in Nova Scotia. It's a model that has been plucked out. Dr. Levin is a great academic and a great educator and has done a lot in educational leadership. But the recommendations that he had obviously weren't based on circumstances in Nova Scotia. Again, when I asked the minister, you know, what schools did Dr. Levin visit? What information did he have about the schools in Nova Scotia? What does he understand about the rural part of our province? Again, no answers to those questions, and that leaves one to believe that perhaps he didn't have a lot of consultation with the people who do know what's going on in our province. Classroom teachers are probably the best source of information about what is needed in our classrooms.
Order, please. The chatter's getting a little high. It's difficult to hear. The honourable member for Colchester North has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's decisions like that you know, why would you give credibility to a report and talk about the recommendations in the report when you know they're not relevant to the circumstance that we're in? And you know, the suggestion by Dr. Levin that we would have to have school closures in our province was certainly out of context. And when questioned on that, again, the answers that came back didn't give anybody much confidence that he, A, had talked to people in rural communities about their schools, that he had talked to the minister and or her staff about what we currently have in place with respect to school closures. We have a school closure policy in place. We know that it's working. We know we've had schools close in many communities across the province, and we know that we've had schools that stayed open because the circumstances were such that we were not going to take away an opportunity for students in some of our rural communities to stay close to their homes. So, you know, again, I go back. I cannot understand why the minister is not prepared to listen and then make the decisions. You know, the minister came out, first of all, she was going to take 22% out of the budget for school boards. And when it became clear that that was, you know, an impossible task, then backtracked a bit and she said, well, we'll get boards to take it from the accumulated surplus. Well, the next day, someone must have told her what accumulated surplus was because she backtracked on that. Accumulated surplus is something that the boards cannot touch. It's the money that kids raise for class trips. It's money that they raise from their cupcake sales and their cheese sales and whatever. That's what accumulated surplus is. So to suggest to the media and to the public that boards might be able to achieve these savings through accumulated surplus was ridiculous. Then the minister came out and said, well, you know, we can achieve it all through attrition. Well, you know, attrition means that when someone retires, you don't replace them. Well, I think the numbers the minister was using were 1,000 teachers over 3 years. Well, Madam Speaker, 1,000 teachers over 3 years is a lot of positions to take out of our system. So then when it became obvious that that wasn't going to work, then we went to another plan. And the other plan was, well, we'll cut programs. We'll balance the books of this province on the backs of kids. And that is exactly what people believe is happening. We're going to cut programs that were designed and proven to help kids succeed. And I could go on with a list of them.
But the Minister of Education should well be aware of what those programs are, why they were put in place, who they're helping, what the impact will be when those positions are gone, and then make a decision. For example, and I can go through the list, but if we look at the whole notion of teacher assistants, and my colleague from Argyll suggested that there are many, many kids who have benefited from the programs that have been put in place, and teacher assistants have been put in place to support students who are not able to be successful in a classroom without some kind of assistance. And that assistance varies. It may be one assistant working with 2 or 3 students, or it may be one-on-one. But there is a criteria that's been set. And if the minister believes that the criteria is not right, you review the criteria and then you look at, are we assigning EAs the best way possible? Are we using the funds within the EA budget the best possible? That would be a better approach than just to take a recommendation from somebody from Ontario to say, well, we're going to get rid of EAs. We have too many. We need to base our decisions on sound evidence and on consultation. And we have now, the minister has now had the level of anxiety amongst parents in this province and teachers raised to an unfortunate high. Because any parent that I'm talking to who has a student who has been getting support from an EA is saying, will that support be there when my child goes back? And they're saying my child cannot survive in a classroom without additional supports. So why not take the time, do the homework, do the research, talk to the people who are affected by this. What is the positive impact of the decision? What is the negative impact of the decision before you make a statement to the public? Because once that statement was made, Madam Speaker, people were worried, people were in tears. People whose child has been able to cope in a classroom only because they've had supports there are afraid that that support will be gone. And I can tell you, Madam Speaker, when we get into September and parents are sending their children back to school, if that's when they're going to find out that the support their child needed in order to even go to school in some cases, secondly, to be functional in the classroom and to be included with others, when they find out that that support is gone, it's very, very unfair to put parents and students through that. So again, it's a matter of looking at the decision that has to be made, the impact that it will have, and do all of that before you come out with some statement. And, you know, people have said that the teachers who are responding daily to the requests that we put out for how will this impact the classroom are saying, why would the minister do this? And they are not saying it because they want to protect their job. They're saying it because they're dedicated to the kids that they're working with. And we have a very dedicated team of teachers in this province. And they have understood the challenges that some of their students have. They have accepted some of the supports and programs that have been put in place so that child can be successful. And their question to the minister is, how can the minister stand up and say, that this cut will not affect the classroom? Anyone who's been in a classroom knows the composition of a class that we have now. And anybody who's moved up the system as a classroom teacher, as I believe the minister has, would have seen the composition of that class change. And I should qualify, most every teacher accepts the fact that they don't know everything. And they want students to get support from reading recovery, and they want their students to get support from EAs, and they're not so proud that they won't accept a little bit of help.
And the reason they accept that help, Madam Speaker, is because they want the best for the kids in their classroom. And I would think that the Minister of Education would want that for every student in this province. And I think it's her responsibility to stand up for every student in this province. And by slashing the budget, and by cutting EAs, and by getting rid of reading recovery program that works, and the minister is quite happy to say, no, it doesn't work. Well, I'm sure you can find one classroom where there's only a 30% success rate. That's not the figure that we should be quoting. We should be quoting the total success of reading recovery. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, I'm going to assume that they finished their business, Mr. Speaker.
Forgive me.
Madam Speaker.
Do you have I recognize the Honourable Acting Opposition Deputy House Leader. I recognize the Honourable Member.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And that concludes our opposition business for today.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish the House to now rise to meet from the hours of 11 a.m. to 12 midnight. With the business would be third reading of Bill 59, the Elections Act. I wish you to now rise.
Thank you. The motion is that we do now rise to meet again tomorrow, Thursday, May 19th, between the hours of 11 a.m. to 12 midnight. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? The motion is carried. We stand adjourned.